Welcome to another episode of the Man That Can Project podcast. I'm your host, Lockie Stewart, and today Cam Fraser is coming back on the show. So he was in episode 90, and we talked about men's sexual health and well-being, and it's been one of our most watched on YouTube and also one of the most listened to on the podcast overall. And I actually listened back to it, and the audio quality was terrible, so sorry, Cam, but we've come a long way. Adding, this will be episode 351. So we've definitely learnt a lot, and myself and Cam have both gone in an upward trajectory with our careers, which is pretty exciting. So I invited Cam back on, obviously having seen his career explode, but also the knowledge and the wealth of information that he puts out to help men with their sexual health and their sexuality. So Cam is inviting, I'm just going to read here because there's a lot of great stuff, and I don't want to miss out on any for you guys, but he's inviting you on a journey into greater self-love, self-awareness, expansion, and empowerment through sex coaching. Who would have thought there would have been sex coaching? But I think we get coaching in most other areas of our life. Why not with the sex? Game on. So you can experience your body, mind, and heart coming into a full alignment through the returning of your sexual energy, intimacy, and passion. Jans, it sounds like something that we all bloody need. So he's a certified sexologist, counselor, registered yoga teacher, Tantric practitioner, and workshop facilitator. So if you want to find more about Cam, head over to his website, Cam Fraser, or you can find him on Instagram here. I've just got him up here. Oh, we've nearly played some audio through there. The Cam Fraser. So the Cam, C-A-M, Fraser, F-R-A-S-E-R. And he has a whole heap of stuff. He has his own podcast, which is Men's Sex Pleasure Podcast. He's an ambassador for Love Honey AU, and that's just, I'll just stop there because there's so much more. But I, for all the members who are a part of the Strong Men of Value, I put this out there to you guys the other day. What questions would you like me to ask him if we don't already cover it? So we've got a list of questions there that I'm very excited for you guys to get answered because I'm also curious and interested as well. So that's enough from me, gents. Once again, if you haven't checked out the Strong Men of Value program, gents, there's no better time than to get started right now so you can kick off 2022 with some huge momentum. And obviously, I'm repping this Mo. It's Movember here, and I love getting behind the Mo because, well, one, I can grow a good one, but it's a great way to raise awareness for men's health. And, they're tackling the big three: testicular cancer, prostate cancer, and mental health and suicide prevention. Now, I'm no expert with the cancers. All I know is I fondle my nuts for a bit of enjoyment, but also to check for lumps. And same with the prostate. I know that the closer we get to 50, the higher risk we are of developing prostate cancer. So, gents, make sure you stay on top of all those health checks because prevention is better than cure. And the next best thing, if you can't get cure, is to get on it early. So, gents, that's enough from me. Let's dive into the episode with the one, the only Cam Fraser, which is good. But how have you been? I think I was listening to our podcast earlier, and
how many years ago was that?
2019, so 2 years. But
Dude,
it's so funny, the audio quality and stuff like that. Like it's just. I was sitting there, I was like, I don't know how people listen to it because it was a good yarn, but the audio quality just was terrible.
Yeah. I remember the house that I was in, man. I didn't have a mic. I was just in this fucking open room. So I would have not been the best fucking guest in terms of audio as well, bro.
Mate, it was still good fun. We've both come a long way since then. You're doing some amazing things, and congrats on the young one.
Thanks very much, man. Yeah, dad life has been pretty wild. Do you have kids? I can't remember.
Nah, I don't yet. No. Well, I got married last month, so.
Oh man! Well, congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you, man. It was the most incredible experience. Like everyone always says, marriage, and they say the same about having children. Like it's the most incredible experience, and it's one of those things that literally you can't understand until you go through it.
Yeah. It's one of the prompts that I sent you, man, was like the birth of our son, which has been like a hectic learning experience for me. Like I talk about holding space quite a lot, and I know a lot of people in men's work talk about holding space, but like that was holding space. You know what I mean? Like I thought I'd held space before, but holy shit, like my partner going through birth and like doing it at home and then having to get rushed to the hospital for an emergency cesarean. Like I was tested, and it was my capacity for space holding. Like it was pretty next level. So I learned a lot from that. And now 6 months in, we've got this little dude who's a little rock star, and he's just like got so much energy. He wakes up and he's like 0 to 100 in about 3 seconds. And then he just is at that level until he just crashes and sleeps. So it's just, just highs and lows, man. It's pretty wild. But it's been an amazing ride, and it's only going to continue.
Congrats once again. So what were some of the lessons that you learned, obviously through holding space, and what were the most testing, parts about that with the childbirth?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that stood out to me was I was afraid, man. Like there's not been a lot of periods in my life where I've been like really afraid of something and being like that close. I've never had no like near-death experiences. I've never had like really any serious injuries and things like that, or life-threatening injuries, I should say. But in that container with my partner, who is literally on the cusp of birth and death, right? And her in particular as well, because of she had obstructed labor. So 100 years ago, or in a different country in a different time, she would have died, right? And our baby would have died as well. Our little son wouldn't have been born because of the way that her labor was progressing. It was not like we needed an emergency cesarean. So like the fear was like nothing like I've experienced before, man. And I wasn't even the one giving birth, I'm not even the one going through it. And so I was like, I was terrified. I can only imagine what, my partner was going through. And so like seeing your partner like in that space of like, and not being able to do anything about it, right? Like I couldn't, I would have if I could. Like I couldn't give birth to the child for her. I couldn't take away the pain. Like all I could do was just be there and support in whatever way she needed in that moment, whether it was like applying certain pressure to her back, or pouring water over her head, or just like giving her someone to squeeze and to hold onto while she was like yelling. It was it was just like a very like I guess the lesson from that was like I had to just let go to what was going to happen. Like I had literally zero control over it. All I could do was just like be there for her in whatever way she needed. And so like that letting go of control was a big lesson for me. And just allowing that to progress in whatever way it was going to progress. And we had like a beautiful doula and a midwife there who were incredible women who were able to kind of facilitate the birth, and they kind of made the decision for us. They were like, yeah, this is not going to progress the way you want it. You need to go to hospital. And I actually drove my fiance to hospital. She was in the back of the car, and because we could have waited for the ambulance to come, but it would have been, because we live in Margaret River, which is a little bit more remote than Perth. It would have been like 45 minutes for the ambulance to come to us, and then another 45 minutes for us to go from our house to the hospital. So we were waiting for another 2 hours. And I was like, nah, fuck that. Jump in the car. We'll just load you up with pillows and like a bucket. And I'll fang it to the hospital. So I got to the hospital, which is about an hour and 15 minutes away. I got there in about 40 minutes, got a couple of speeding tickets. Wow. And just like flew into the emergency section, and she was just jumped straight into a wheelchair. She was rushed straight to the ward, I suppose, or the theater. And that was gnarly, man. Like with her in the back of the car, like just going like what's going to happen? Just like her fear and transition, like just holding that for her and not allowing my own anxiety and my own fear to overcome, and not to panic, right? And to be like, no, this is what's happening. We're almost there. We've got 15 minutes left. Like it's going to be okay. And and I was just like, my nervous system was like this for, probably about 3 months afterwards, man. Everything after that's just a bit of a blur to me, man. Because I was just in survival mode, man. Because after surgery, cesarean's like a pretty major abdominal surgery. So like I was holding space for her around like, getting better, I suppose. And so then we've got like a little newborn and just taking care of him. And it was just wild, dude. Like the first 3 months I was just on, just autopilot, just survival mode. And And so like, I don't really have a lot of memories from those early days, which is pretty weird. But yeah, I'm just writing my birth story at the moment, so it's all very fresh, and I'm just reminiscing a lot of things. So yeah, thanks for listening, man. I realized I just rambled on.
Are you writing a story about it?
I'm writing just like a little birth story, just like putting down my thoughts on pen to paper. Because my fiance did, and she invited me to do it as well, to get like both perspectives, like what she remembers and what she was going through versus like what I remember, what I was going through. So we're just going to like do little pieces each and then share those.
That's such a incredible idea, because from, obviously, as we just said, I don't have children, and hearing your story, and everyone's experience is so unique and so different. But one thing that I've started to notice is a lot of blokes never really share their experience around how having children, or even that whole birth process, affects them, or the experiences for them, because, as you mentioned, often they can feel helpless because you see your partner in pain, like mass amounts of pain, or potentially on the cusp of death, and there's nothing you can do. You feel helpless and never get to talk about that. But do you feel the like, obviously you work in the men's health space, but the men's sex coaching space as well, but do you think all the work that you've been doing around that really helped prepare you for what you guys went through there?
Yeah, I think like my general like personal development and self-growth and men's work definitely helped in terms of like being able to communicate with my partner and being able to like not let my own shit get in the way of what was happening for her, and being able to hold that for myself, and then going out and processing it independently of her, like not necessarily burdening her with like the stuff that I was going through, because I knew that she was going through exponentially more than that. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go out and regulate myself and use the tools that I have. So I don't know if sex coaching specifically really helped for that, but what sex coaching and my work around sexuality has helped with is in the months afterwards, right? Where our sex life and intimacy has totally changed, because we've got like there's a little person in between us, like all the time, right? We've got like this little baby that's either attached to Edwina's boob, or or I'm holding him, or he's like there just with us because he's a little baby, we can't leave him alone. And so we've got this third person who's not interrupted, but has like just really transformed the way that we are intimate with one another, Edwina and I. And so I don't think if I had any experience or background in like the sexuality work that I've done, I don't think that would be as smooth a transition. I think that we'd probably be really struggling. And I also think that a lot of couples really struggle after the birth of their child. Like, something I talk about is like, how do we get our sexual needs met? And a lot of couples, I feel, the way that they get their sexual needs met is just through penetrative sex. It's just through penis and vagina intercourse. And that's the only thing on the table for them. And Edwina and I have been together for 5 years. We very early on discovered a whole bunch of other ways to get our sexual needs met with one another, and to explore our intimacy and sensuality and sexuality with each other. And so that isn't the only thing that we have available to us. And that was kind of, the beauty of that was kind of taken away because of Edwina's surgery. Like, she had major abdominal surgery. Her body was sore. She was stiff. Like, it was just not comfortable for her to have penetrative sex after the cesarean, and she didn't even give birth vaginally. So women that do give birth vaginally, right, and do maybe tear as well and have these experiences of discomfort and pain, they're probably even longer not able to have penetrative sex. So if that's like the only thing that you guys have got as a couple, and that's kind of taken away because of the birthing experience, then it can be really difficult for a lot of couples. And I think a lot of couples really struggle with that time immediately after birth. And then especially with having kids, setting aside time for self-pleasure can feel really, not only can it be a challenge, but you can also feel quite guilty about doing it, because you kind of have this mentality of, well, I should be looking after my kid, or I should be helping my partner look after the kid. I shouldn't be doing this by myself, for myself. I have definitely felt that, that spending time for myself, even if it's just for work or to do a podcast, right? Very early on, I was like, oh, fuck, I feel really guilty for doing this, right? And not being out and helping. And I work from home as well, and I don't really work that many hours a week, but I still felt that experience of guilt come through. So So definitely the sexuality work that I've done has helped with that experience for sure.
Thanks for sharing on that and touching on that. Just brought a question because we've had a few guys, three of the guys who are members in our communities and they're great mates all had boys within the last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But obviously for those who don't have tools outside of just penetrative sex, like what are some things that, or where can, I'm saying upskill, but where can you learn about these sorts of things? And obviously, learning prior is probably better, but like, because once you're sore and you're agitated, it's probably, the last thing on your mind. But I think it's probably even something that I'm interested in learning about because, we all have wants, needs and desires as you said. And I also know that a lot of blokes get their validation and then their connection within a relationship through sex. And, obviously when that's taken away, not, obviously for the reasons that you've mentioned, like what are some of those things that we can explore looking at?
I mean, the first thing is a shameless plug for myself, like come and just tune in with me and the work that I do. And it doesn't have to be, in a paid capacity at all. You can, I try and educate as much as possible for free on social media. So that's my first suggestion.
Yeah, your page is legit.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I appreciate it. And then like another thing would be like, there's a really good book called, Love and Sex in the Time of Colic, written by a sex researcher by Ian Kerner, which is a pretty cool book, which talks about, sex after a child's been born and colic. That word colic is about a child who in particular has a lot of discomfort, and is crying quite a lot,
yep.
Which can be quite stressful, which is our son had colic, and was quite uncomfortable. So that's a really good resource. And then just like, in terms of practicalities as well, is have that conversation with your partner. Like if you're a couple and you're looking to have children, or if it's on the cards, or even if like you've conceived and your partner's pregnant, like have a conversation about the sex that you're having and, acknowledging the fact that things will change, right? I think there's this like mentality that a lot of us have, men in particular, have of like, oh, things will just go back to normal, or things will be the way they were before, or kind of living in the past, so to speak. So, have that conversation, that pretty vulnerable conversation, to be like, hey, I kind of anticipate that things might change. What else can we do about this? Like if things do start to maybe build up a bit of tension and a bit of friction because we're not having sex, like is there other things that we can do? A kind of thought experiment here is, I like to use the analogy of like feeling hungry is the same as feeling horny, right? And when you're hungry, you choose from an erotic menu, right? Or you choose from a menu like what meal you want to eat. And so when you're horny, you choose from an erotic menu what meal quote unquote meal you want to eat with your partner. I think I even shared this on your podcast last time I was on, man. But it's just a fucking great framework for thinking about other ways of experiencing sex and pleasure with your partner. But that's like, if your partner's not going to initiate those conversations, then you as a leader, right, need to have that conversation. And it's taking leadership from the place of like hierarchical, where you're like, being assertive and directive and telling your partner what to do, to a place of like, almost like leading by example, from a place of like vulnerability and saying like, hey, I think we need to have a chat about this. I think it's probably going to be a thing, right? It's a thing for other couples. No one really talks about it. So it's probably worth us having a conversation about this and exploring this. And I want to invite you into that conversation with me. Like come in and join me in this vulnerability and let's speak about some things that maybe we haven't had a conversation about before. Because what goes left unsaid will start to fester, and that'll eat away at your relationship, right? And that'll eat away at your, especially like your love for each other. Once you start to like build that resentment because you're not having sex, or your partner's not initiating as much because she's too busy breastfeeding, or she feels touched out because she's got a little baby on her the whole time, and maybe you're not feeling that you've got a lot of touch time with her. Like those are real things that you got to be mindful of, and if you're not conscious of them or having conversations about them, you'll build up that resentment, and that'll just start to chip away at your connection to your partner. So yeah, I mean, the practical thing that I lean on here is just have a conversation and just own it and just be vulnerable, right? That's fucking half of the, not even half, like probably like 90% of this whole thing is just like, just lean into your vulnerability. It's tough, right? And if you're, if you're framing your like manhood and masculinity around strength, it's a pretty strong thing to fucking do, to lean into that vulnerability and have tough conversations, right? If you, it's weaker to just like sweep those under the rug and pretend they're not there. That's for fucking sure. So that would be my suggestion, is like lean into your strength, lean into that integrity, and be vulnerable with your partner and have those conversations.
Communication is definitely the key. And I always say to a lot of people, like, if communication's a downfall and you struggle to articulate what you're feeling, like, the longer you put it off, the harder it's going to be, because as you build up more responsibility, have children, and faced with those tension points, often the emotion can take over and creates a bigger issue, right? And most of us are in intimate relationships because we have feelings and care and love for those people. So the best thing that we can do, as you said, is show strength, is learn to have those conversations. And there's even tools like what I started out doing was film myself, like watch the videos back, and then I'd go, I could try using different language. I could, pause more. I could listen more, and I could actually genuinely care about what my partner's saying back and really try to understand what's going on. Because one thing you just mentioned there with the touch time with the baby, I'd never heard of that. So thanks for sharing that. That's why I'm grateful I get to have these conversations with you, because it's preparing me for when that time comes. Yeah. But you don't realize I always think about if my missus doesn't want to have sex with me, I'm like, well, I used to get really frustrated at that. I'm like, come on, what's going on here? Like, I'm a charmer. But then I would realize that, she's done everything around the house all day. She's been flat out. She's done the shopping, cooking, and like, she's had all of these burdens, and I have not lifted it. I've been working, so I feel like I've been doing a lot of stuff, but I haven't helped around the house. And obviously then you take that to the extent that you did, where there's a child that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of attention, and even touch, which I didn't even consider. So there's a lot of things that we can learn to be mindful of, learn to be aware of, that then can help us in our communication and awareness moving forward, which is brilliant. So thanks for touching on that.
Yeah, no worries.
One of the other things, obviously, here was a conscious conception with your partner. Talk me through that.
Yeah, right. So conscious conception is just like my fancy spiritual way of saying planned pregnancy. But the idea behind it was, Edwina and I, we had been together for 5 years, and we were just, talking about kids for about 3 of those years, and kind of just thinking like, when would we be ready? When do we want to start trying for kids? Like, we didn't want it to be an accident, essentially, was what we had both decided on. We were like, if we're going to do, parenthood, we want to do it with as much intentionality as possible, with as much mindfulness and awareness as possible. And so we started this idea, we didn't start it, but we kind of we heard of this idea of conscious conception, which is like not only kind of planning the day that you're going to try for conceiving, right? Which is part of it. But also like the months leading up to that, taking responsibility for our own health, taking responsibility for our reproductive health. Edwina quit drinking and quit coffee for a year before we started trying, right? So not only was it like, okay, we're going to start trying now, it was the conversation of like, okay, we're going to start trying to get healthy before we start trying to then have a baby. So it was like just like dialing it back to be like, what can we do now so that in 6 months' time we can start trying and make sure that it's as healthy and as conscious, I suppose, to use that word, as possible. And so part of that for me, if I speak into like the men's aspect of it, is I did a bunch of research and I looked online, and there's really like no real in-depth information for what men can do to prepare for conception. It's just kind of like the generic stop drinking as much, don't smoke, like get your general health in check, just very generalized advice. And I was like, this is like, I'm already doing that, what can I do to like take things to that next level so I can, I suppose that my approach to my work is always like, how much more nuanced can I get? What other information is out there? Like, how can I take this to something that's like really meaningful for me, as opposed to just like not drinking and smoking, like I said, which I wasn't doing already.
Yeah.
So I did some research and I found out that like, so like a sperm, right? A sperm cell, takes 72 days to mature in the human adult male. So the sperm that you ejaculate today, right, is 72 days old. So it's a 3-month-old sperm, right? It's been kind of developing in your body, in your testicles for 3 months before it gets ejaculated today. So I was like, okay, that's interesting to know. And then the next thing I found out was like, there's such a thing called ejaculate mediated paternal effects, which is like, obviously in the journey of conception, you're contributing DNA to the embryo that's being born, or the zygote. But not only are you contributing that, you're also contributing like things like stress and like all the other lifestyle things that you are, that are happening, all the stuff that you're putting into your body, like all of that is being contributed along with your DNA to the conception. And so I was like, okay, well that must mean that, if a sperm takes 3 months to mature in my body, then over the 3 months, anything that I'm doing is going to impact that sperm that's being, developed, and then that's going to contribute to the conception. So I was like, all right, well, for a minimum, at least for 3 months, I've got to be like on a pretty strict health kick, I suppose. And I found out that within 72 hours, your diet can really impact your sperm quality as well. So if you eat something, it has a pretty immediate effect on the sperm that you're ejaculating. And so I was like, all right, well then I've got to make sure then the 3 days or so before we decide to conceive that I'm like really dialing in on like what I'm putting into my body and how much nourishment I'm getting, and so that the sperm that I'm ejaculating in that moment for conception is like as primo and as optimized as possible, right? That was like my thinking. And so for a minimum of 3 months, yeah, totally. And so for a minimum of 3 months, I was like really on it. But I did a whole 6-month kind of purification process, and I, lent on my understanding of Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, and what their protocols are for purification and things like that. And then we did like a ritual around the conception as well. So on the day of, we made sure that it wasn't just like, wham bam, thank you, ma'am, get in there, do the deed, and then just and then think nothing of it. It was like very intentional. It was done in a very mindful way. And so we had the specific type of we had a birth stone that we had intentionally picked out that we wanted to use as part of the conception. And then we set intentions together, and we kind of like did a little mantra, and we called in like the spirit baby that we wanted, and the one that we'd be connecting to for a while. And we fell pregnant first time, straight up, like good to go. It was pretty amazing. And the even more amazing thing about this, and this isn't something I've shared too much of, but I'm happy to share it here, is I practice what I call conscious ejaculation. But for people that maybe aren't familiar with that term, it's essentially just ejaculation retention. I have my own semen retention practice, and that practice had been so it'd been something I'd been so habitual with for my whole time with Edwina, that time that we conceived was the first time in our whole relationship, in our whole 4.5 years, that I ejaculated inside of it as well. So that was also another really special moment for us, and it was actually a very emotional moment for us as well. I didn't want to say I'd obviously ejaculated in the 4 years, but it just had never been inside of it. We'd never practiced any hormonal birth control. We never used condoms. We never, our birth control method was the withdrawal method, and my withdrawal game is pretty strong. So I was pretty happy with that. Well done. Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, so like so that was another big part of like the conscious conception process as well. It was like, okay, this is going to be the first time that this particular experience happens, and like, can we honor that, and can we kind of make it a special thing? And yeah, so it was just a really powerful experience for the two of us, and I don't advocate that that's something that everyone has to do. But it was something that we wanted to do, and it felt really right for us. And now we've got this beautiful little, indigo child who's just, doing some crazy shit already. And, and it feels like everything that we did definitely contributed to like who he is as a little person and who he's going to grow up to be. So just felt really special for us.
I love that. Thanks for sharing all of that as well. I love that whole concept of conscious conception and being actually intentional. I have a mate, Benny, and him and his wife did the same. Their boy is probably 18 months old, but they went away for a weekend, and they're really healthy and mindful of what they eat and how they exercise and managing stress. But he was the same. He's like, we went away for a whole planned weekend for just to conceive, and he said it was the most incredible thing. So the detail that you shared there's probably some blokes going, what the fuck are we listening to right now? For me, what I really took away from that as well was there's so many more special moments you can gain from sexual intercourse or conceiving and all that sort of stuff if you're mindful and intentional. Because for a lot of blokes, it is literally wham bam, thank you ma'am, just like masturbation. Like most blokes just get in there and rip the fucking wings off it and are done.
Yep.
But there's obviously, as you were talking about these sexual education and learning to feel these special moments, being mindful can make it so much more of a beautiful, intimate experience with your partner that, it's hard to put into words, right? I always say to my missus, like, I just feel so lucky that I'm the one who gets to be intimate with her. I don't take that for granted. So, but then even those steps into the lead up of how you can make that whole process more meaningful and more beautiful is something that I'm definitely open to, because once again, I've had a lot of meaningless sex in my life, and it's like, well, then you're on to the next. I guess that's where porn probably comes into play with people. I know one of your recent or actually I think it's a tile on your Instagram page. So go check out his Cam's Instagram. I gave the hashtag earlier in the intro, but there was one there around what's it called? Pornography. I'll have to bring this up. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all good.
It was ethical porn. I was thinking illicit. I'm like, it's all illicit, but ethical porn. And obviously with that, like most blokes, when we turn to porn, it's just like I said, you feel horny, you go rip the wings off it, you're off. Yeah. But as you were saying, you've got this. Can you talk more about this semen retention or ejaculation retention? What the hell is it? Sort of thing?
Yeah, right. Okay, so
myself included, like, what the fuck's going on here?
Sure. So ejaculation retention is just the personal practice of making the decision not to ejaculate when you're having sex or masturbating. And so some guys might be going, well, why the fuck would I want to do that? Because that's the whole point. And I do get that reaction with a lot of guys. And so some of the reasons why I suggest experimenting with not ejaculating is, firstly, because it's a habit, right? It's a pretty strongly ingrained pattern in our bodies, right? I often ask guys, when was the last time you had sex or masturbated and didn't ejaculate? And most of the time guys go, never. Literally every single time, unless maybe they've been drinking and they've got like whiskey dick or brewer's droop, then they're like, no, that's the reason why I have sex or masturbate. And so I go, okay, do you think then there's a pretty strong correlation or association between these two things? Do you think there's possibly an association in your mind and in your body that you're having sex in order to ejaculate, as opposed to having sex in order to experience pleasure and connect with your partner and to have this meaningful experience, right? Are you just maybe going through the motions to get that fix, that hit of ejaculation at the end of the experience, and kind of get that dopamine squirt into your brain? And when we start to like unpack that, there's this and we can approach this at a couple of different ways. The first is like I said, the dopamine, like the neurotransmitters that are happening when we ejaculate. Like we kind of take ourselves on a bit of a roller coaster ride, because when we, and maybe guys will resonate with this, when we are building up to ejaculation, dopamine's kind of going up, oxytocin's going up. So we feel really, really good, right? We feel pretty euphoric. And then after we've ejaculated, a lot of guys experience a crash, right? They kind of bottom out after they've ejaculated, because we've used up all of our stores of dopamine. We've used up all our stores of oxytocin. They've kind of flooded the brain. We've got to take a bit of time to build those back up again. So a lot of guys feel a little bit flat after ejaculating. They feel a little bit disconnected from their partner as well. Part of the reason of that is there's an inverse relationship between dopamine and another neurotransmitter called prolactin. And so when dopamine goes down, prolactin goes up. And prolactin's this kind of feeling in our body. Well, like for starters, in women, prolactin's responsible for lactation, hence prolactin. It's like pro-lactation. So it makes women breastfeed, essentially. But when we have it in our bodies, as people that can't breastfeed, it's responsible for the feeling of being like satiated, for feeling like, like we've, like, to go back to that erotic menu kind of analogy, we've like eaten our meal and we feel full afterwards, right? And so it's the reason why we can't go for round 2 very quickly after we've come. It's because of prolactin in our body, and we're like, okay, I feel done, and now I don't want to go again, right? And so if we look at like, okay, we're just kind of going up and down whenever we, like, and most guys ejaculate either a couple of times a day or once every couple of days. And so what they're doing with their neurotransmitters is essentially just going on this roller coaster of building themselves up, bottoming out, and then building themselves up again and bottoming out. And oftentimes if guys are tuned into it, they'll notice that on average, what I found is guys will masturbate and ejaculate maybe once every 2 days. And the reason for that is because of that experience of like, they've bottomed out, they don't really feel too sexual the next morning, the next day. And then, that afternoon, they kind of start to feel that urge and that drive and that craving again for dopamine and to ejaculate. And so they do it again. They'll go and watch porn, or they'll go and have sex with their partner, and essentially just go through the motions to get another ejaculation, to kind of get that next experience of that high, right? And so like, if you want to keep on going down that route, and I don't really like this, but some people equate that to an addictive behavior or like a compulsive behavior. I'm not that, I suppose like hardline and extremist when it comes to like this sort of, kind of stuff. But it's like experimenting with that it can be really beneficial to kind of break that up and down and notice how it feels to maybe go 7 days without ejaculating, and notice how your mood kind of changes, or go 14 days without ejaculating, see how your mood changes then, how your energy levels change. And there's like some very, there's a tiny amount of research, it's definitely not conclusive, but there's a tiny amount of research to suggest as well that abstaining from ejaculation can have a little bit of an increase in your testosterone. So like if you take a break from ejaculating for about 7 days, there's been one study that suggests that there's a bit of an increase in your serum levels of testosterone, gives you a little boost in energy. Again, kind of leaning into this idea that a lot of guys feel a little bit drained after they've come. So if you don't come for a couple of days, you might notice that you don't get that feeling of being drained. In fact, you get this feeling of like, almost like a lot of guys frame it as sexually frustrated. And when you're sexually frustrated, you kind of feel pent up. Or if you're doing other things, I'm not just saying like, don't touch your cock for fucking 14 days. Like, don't have sex for, like, I'm saying, this is in a culmination of practices. You can turn that like feeling of pent up tension, sexual frustration into like vitality and feeling alive and feeling fucking full and feeling like invigorated, and using that for other things, as opposed to being like, well, I feel really tense, I need to fucking bust a nut to get rid of this energy. We can use that energy for something else. And so that's part of this practice as well. Another thing is like, I speak a little bit about the symbology of ejaculation, right? So when we're with a partner, especially heterosexual couples, when we have sex, when do we know that sex is finished, right? Well, it goes kind of unspoken, but sex is finished when the guy ejaculates, right? He comes, he can't get it up again, right? Like I said before, because of prolactin, and so we just roll over, have a cigarette, go to sleep, and and that's it. So sex is finished when he ejaculates. But if you experiment with not ejaculating, all of a sudden, well, when the hell is sex finished? When do we know when to stop? And by taking ejaculation off the table like that, it kind of prompts you to think, what else can we do, right? If I'm not driving towards ejaculation and just kind of going, A, B, C, D equals E for ejaculation, then let's switch it up. Let's maybe, if I know that penetrative sex is going to get me really close to the edge of coming, then maybe let's not have as much penetrative sex. let me go down on you for a bit. Let me use some toys. How about, we use fingers instead? Like, let's try other things, because we're not focusing on getting to that end goal of ejaculation. It can really open up. It's kind of Pandora's box. It can really open up what sex could be, as opposed to just getting to that destination. You can enjoy the journey a lot more. It also is a really mindful way to make that decision of bringing up like stories that you can challenge, because like a story for a lot of women in particular is, if he's ejaculated, it means he's enjoyed himself. If he hasn't ejaculated, it means he hasn't enjoyed himself, right? We as a kind of sexual society, we've conflated ejaculation with men's experiences of pleasure. So if he didn't ejaculate, it means he didn't have any pleasure, right? Every guy will tell you that's just not the case, because sex feels good for sex's sake. And obviously ejaculation is kind of the icing on the cake. But a lot of women they haven't worked through that story. And so as a couple, if you go, okay, we're going to take ejaculation off the table here, and then you don't ejaculate with your partner, a story that can be brought up for her is like, oh my God, did he not enjoy himself? Did he not experience pleasure? Does that mean that I'm not hot enough? Does that mean he doesn't find me attractive if he didn't come? Like, there's a lot of these self-worth stories that can be really mindfully and intentionally brought up so that they can be challenged and rewritten when you make the decision not to ejaculate with your partner. It can be a really powerful tool for like just reframing and rewriting your scripts around sexuality, and men's sexuality in particular. So that's another reason. There's a whole bunch of reasons why you might want to experiment. And again, like I said, I'm not very hardline or extremist. I'm not going to say you need to not ejaculate ever again. I'm an advocate for what I call conscious ejaculation, which is my own practice of, intentionally ejaculating, like I said before, not just going through the motions and being like, oh, well, I just fucking came again and it's into the toilet, or it's just, I wipe it up with a tissue and just throw it in the bin. I try to honor my physical processes, right? And not just kind of just mindlessly jerk off. I try to make it at least something that's a little bit more meaningful for me. And so part of that is, I have I'll maybe not ejaculate for 2 weeks and then ejaculate with, the intention of like, okay, I'm making a decision. I'm going to ejaculate today during this self-pleasuring or during the sex that I'm having with my partner. And so we kind of consecrate it, make it a little bit of a ritual. I still self-pleasure, I still have sex, still do things that are sexual within those 2 weeks. I just make the decision not to ejaculate. And I've gotten to the point now where I personally can experience an orgasm without an ejaculation. That's another thing to be mindful of, is orgasm and ejaculation they're two separate physiological processes. So you can learn how to have one without the other. And then once you've done that, you can also learn how to have multiple orgasms, right? If you're having an orgasm that doesn't involve an ejaculation, then you're not getting that prolactin dump. So you can go again for round 2 and you can have another orgasm and you can have another one, and you can go until you kind of feel tired, essentially. So that's a practice as well.
How does one learn to do that?
So there's a whole, I do a whole coaching process around this, but to put it into some really easy steps is the first thing is the education piece, is to realize that ejaculation and orgasm are two separate things, right? A lot of guys don't know that. So that might be a big light bulb moment for guys that are listening.
My light bulb's going bang.
Yeah, so very simply, ejaculation is a function of the sympathetic nervous system, right? It's a function of our fight or flight response, right? The survival, it's a survival response. And if you think about this, it kind of makes sense, because in ancient history, if we weren't ejaculating, we weren't passing on our genes, no one was going to fall pregnant, right? If there was no ejaculation. And there's also a school of thought here, which is maybe even premature ejaculation isn't really a thing, because it was maybe at one point evolutionarily adaptive to ejaculate as quickly as possible. Because if you were having sex and you ejaculated in 30 seconds, then you were more than likely going to pass on your genes, compared to the guy who lasted 3 hours. And also sex is a pretty vulnerable thing to do. You're in a pretty vulnerable position, susceptible to attacks from behind, or your attention isn't elsewhere, so someone could come and beat you over the head. And so to be in a vulnerable position for 30 seconds is probably a lot more advantageous than being in a vulnerable position for 3 hours. And so there's a school of thought there around premature ejaculation. And so biologically ejaculation is a part of this survival response in our body. It's part of our sympathetic nervous system. Orgasm, on the other hand, or like erection and arousal and our experience of pleasure, is a function of the parasympathetic nervous system, or the rest and digest response, the relaxation response in our body, right? And so kind of sex and arousal and masturbation is a beautiful dance between these two branches of the nervous system. And we kind of build up this arousal through the parasympathetic nervous system. It's kind of the reason why if you're really stressed out, you find it hard to be turned on, right? You kind of have to be a little bit relaxed, a little bit in your parasympathetic in order to feel aroused. And then as you build up that arousal, you kind of switch over into your sympathetic branch and you ejaculate, and you have that, that experience of prolactin coming through and all that sort of stuff we were talking about before. So in a very simplified way, what we can do to help separate these two things is try not to go into the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, and try to spend as much time in the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, right? And so there's a whole bunch of practices to do that. One very simple yet profound one is using your breath, right? We, through people like Wim Hof and all the studies we've been doing on the cardiovascular system, we now know that we can voluntarily control which part of the autonomic nervous system we engage in by breathing in certain ways. So for example, breathing down into your diaphragm or down into your belly, you're doing this diaphragmatic breath, is a really simple way of engaging your parasympathetic nervous system, of relaxing you, right? So it's kind of the reason why in yoga and breathwork classes and all these other things, we encourage everyone to breathe like really low down into their body and really slow and really deep and controlled. It's because it's really helpful for relaxing, as opposed to breathing up into your chest, breathing up into your thorax and speeding the breath up and getting quicker and quicker and quicker and shallower and shallower and shallower. That is what we do when we ejaculate, right? Some guys even hold their breath when they ejaculate. And there's, this experience of, again, engaging the sympathetic nervous system. So very simple practice is like when you're masturbating or when you're having sex, slow down as much as you can and slow your breathing down as much as you can, really deepen it as much as you can, and notice how that changes your experience of pleasure. What you probably notice is that you'll experience a lot more pleasure, and you'll have it'll be awkward and clunky at first, because a lot of guys have a very, like I said, habitual way that they have sex or habitual way that they masturbate. It looks the same every single time. So doing something different can feel a little bit awkward, and can also feel a little bit like there's a lot of shame around it as well, of doing things that aren't considered quote unquote normal. So there's a lot of resistance for guys to do this, but and so that's part of like the coaching process that I was alluding to before, is like overcoming that. But a simple like physical practice is just like change the way you breathe and notice how it changes your experience of pleasure. And if you can spend as much time in that parasympathetic branch as possible, and try not to engage with the sympathetic branch, then you're not going to ejaculate. And once you're there and you've kind of got control over that, then what you can do is start to experiment with that heightened state of pleasure, that kind of peak state of pleasure in that parasympathetic dominance, and explore what that looks like, right? Explore that kind of orgasmic state, and spend time there. That's another key part of this, is like, so there's a practice called edging. Some guys that are listening might be familiar with it, but edging is essentially like getting to the edge of that ejaculation. So like building up your pleasure, building up your arousal, building up that kind of feeling in your body. And like, holy shit, I'm on the edge here. Like if I go any harder or any faster, I'm going to pop, I'm going to reach that point of no return, and ejaculation is going to be inevitable. Spend time there. Don't just kind of bust past there and go straight for ejaculation, which is what a lot of guys do, right? A lot of guys are actually uncomfortable in that space, because feeling a lot of pleasure in our body is, like I said, there's a lot of fear around it. There's also like this idea that experiencing pleasure and dropping into that state is considered quite feminine, and a lot of guys are afraid of that part of themselves. Again, part of the whole coaching process is unraveling that. But if you can, and you feel called to kind of practice this, spend time on that edge, and start off with 2 minutes, then see if you can spend that 5 minutes at that edge, and then see if you can extend it to 10 minutes and 20 minutes, just like really keeping yourself at that boiling point. And what will typically happen, again, I've kind of tried to condense this as much as possible, is you'll have an orgasm that doesn't have an ejaculation, and it'll be a happy accident. you kind of like, I encourage guys to like take the goal out of this as well. Just enjoy the experience for pleasure's sake, not with the like goal of, okay, today I'm going to have a non-ejaculatory orgasm and today's the day. And, you know, I've been working hard and now I deserve it. You know, just enjoy the process and enjoy like that experience and do it for the sake of it feeling fucking good. And when you kind of get to that point, it's like I said, oftentimes it's a happy accident. It just kind of happens and you're like, oh my God, like I just had this and I didn't come, and oh my God, I'm still hard and I can keep going and I still want to go. And it's just like this really beautiful, it's this really beautiful light bulb moment. And it's an embodied moment as well, right? Because I kind of talk about this, and as guys are listening, they're probably like, wow, okay, I kind of get this. I understand it. It's a thing, but it isn't until you kind of actually feel it in your body and kind of something switches for you that you go, oh, okay, this is a thing that I can do. This is like, it's just, you know, and that was for me as well. It was like something that I heard about, something that I knew, but until I actually experienced it, that was when things like turned the corner for me. I was like, okay, this is actually something that my body is capable of and that I have the capacity to do, and I can explore this and do it again. It's kind of like the door was finally opened. And from there, it was just kind of like no turning back. So that's as condensed as I can make it, man. But there's so much more, which is really, like I nerd out on it because I really, you know, love talking about it. But that's as kind of like as a nutshell as I can make it.
I'm definitely looking forward to trying to figure all that out. Is it one of those things that how long is there a rough time frame it takes to? Obviously, there's no set standards, but you know, roughly for yourself, like how long did it take for you to experience that?
It took me, because no one was guiding me. I was trying to figure it out all on my own. It took me about 5 years to like really nail it. In my coaching process, yeah, right. I can get it down, and I've had results with guys in about 6 months. And that's one of the reasons why I coach, is because I have, you know, had all these experiences, these life experiences that no one really helped me out with. I just kind of had to piece it all together and figure it all out. And it took me so long. And I was like, it doesn't have to take that long. It shouldn't have to take that long, right? And so part of my coaching is like bringing all of that awareness and guidance and strategy and making it like really like, here's a step-by-step plan that you can follow to start to change the way that you self-pleasure and start to change the way that you have sex. And part of that is like unraveling all of those stories. Some guys have more trauma and shame than others. Some guys pick it up really quickly because they've already they've got that openness and they're kind of more familiar with their femininity and their sensuality. So it's a little bit different for each guy, but typically around 6 months, guys have like seen some radical shifts in the way that they experience pleasure.
It's awesome that you highlight that it is individual depending on where we're at, right? Everyone has layers. I always go back to that Shrek analogy with the onions, and it's like peeling back layers, because it's, you know, what's that next step that I need for me to be able to move closer to whatever it is that I'm working towards. So, gents, if you're listening and it's something that's caught your interest, hit Cam up, because, yeah, I think as with every area of life, there's things that we can improve upon. I think, you know, it keeps life exciting growing in, you know, various areas of your life, but the fastest way it's the reason why I coach as well, the fastest way to get results is to go to see people who've, you know, figured it out, got the results that you're sort of looking to explore or looking to improve upon. But what you were talking about there with the ejaculation and the orgasm, is that how you sort of go on to have that, you know, I remember you saying the multiple orgasmic experience. Is that's sort of the same method you use to achieve that?
Yeah. So like that's one strategy. And then, you know, you kind of have that experience, the kind of doors opened, and then you go, all right, well, maybe I want to, you know, try that again. I want to experiment with that again. And you can kind of keep on going down that route. Another way, and this is, you know, guys might not want to hear this, but another way, and possibly a more easier way to learn how to have multiple orgasms and become like a multi-orgasmic man, is learning how to have a prostate orgasm, and, you know, going through the process of putting something up your ass and experiencing pleasure that way. A lot of guys feel uncomfortable with that. A lot of reasons why. We don't have to go into that, but the prostate, the way that the prostate is innervated, it's innervated by a nerve called the hypogastric nerve, which is, it carries predominantly parasympathetic fibers. Again, I spoke about the parasympathetic nervous system being responsible for, rest and digest, relaxation, orgasm. So stimulation of the prostate to the point of orgasm, because of the way that the nervous system works, doesn't include an ejaculation. So a prostate orgasm, by virtue of it being a prostate, doesn't include an ejaculation with it. So you can have a prostate orgasm, and then you can have another one, and you can keep on going, and you can stop whenever you kind of feel like you want it. And typically a prostate orgasm is easier, and at least in my own experience and the work that I've done with guys, is easier than going through the process of like, okay, I've got to try and separate orgasm and ejaculation by, stimulating my genitals. Again, there's a lot of patterns that we have to break when it comes to that, because a lot of guys get to that point of like, that peak experience, and they're like, oh, fuck, I'm already here. I might as well just ejaculate. Might as well just come. It's a very strong pathway for a lot of guys because we've just ingrained it into our bodies. But exploring the prostate and having prostate stimulation and having an orgasm that way is totally different. And it feels a lot different compared to a non-ejaculatory orgasm in the way that I previously described it. It's a lot more full-bodied. It's a lot more intense as well. And there's a lot of other reasons why I advocate for like anal play and prostate stimulation. But yeah, a lot of guys have resistance to that. So even though it's, I would argue, easier to become multi-orgasmic that way, like in a physiological sense, in maybe a psychological sense, it's a lot harder because guys have a lot more resistance to doing it.
Well, there you go, gents. Cam's obviously, this time's flown, but you've mentioned a whole heap of stuff that I find very, very interesting. And obviously you can head over to Cam's Instagram even. Like, would the best place for people to find you, Cam, be on Instagram, or where would you send people if they wanted to find out more about what you offer and how they can get involved?
So Instagram and any social media, really, I'm at the Cam Fraser on all social medias. Instagram's like my main one. And then my website is cam-fraser.com, and there's some cool shit on there as well, but definitely social media is where I try and like do as much educating.
Because you have a podcast, it's Men, Sex and Pleasure, is that?
I do, yeah. I have my podcast as well. I never promote my own podcast, but yeah, thanks for that reminder.
I've listened to a couple of episodes, but yeah, gents, I'm massive. I've been reading a heap of books recently around this space, because I think, one of the biggest reasons why men take their life by suicide is from relationship breakdown, and a lot of the tension that can come through within relationships is from the intimacy side of things. So if we don't ever learn to be vulnerable in that space, or learn how we can improve it for ourselves and our partners, we're not really putting our best foot forward to step up and take ownership. And I know you talk a lot about sexual leadership. I talk about life leadership. And realistically, if we want to take ownership for things, we got to learn to be vulnerable. We got to learn to accept things within ourselves and put our hand up to be better. So, gents, definitely head over to Cam's. I'll link a heap of stuff in the bios, whichever you're listening to this episode on. But there's some things here I'm just going to read from your Instagram. Cam, outperform a porn star men's course, Man Myths. So that's for the ladies. Obviously the podcast. So when you get sick of listening to my podcast, head over to Cam's. No, I'm kidding. Listen to both of them. You got the YouTube. You can work one-on-one. And then there's a free self-pleasure course. So if you want to just check it out, go over there and get involved with all that. But I've been following your journey for 3 years now. And I always like reading your posts. You get a fair few posts banned, don't you?
Oh, man, all the time, dude. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, but it's such interesting. To be honest, even when you talk about the prostate play and all that sort of stuff, for me, it's very confrontational, and I find it really challenging to read. But once again, I like to consider myself open-minded to learn. But then obviously I see 2 days later, this fucking post got pulled down for breaching guidelines. I'm like, you're purely just educating people.
I know, man.
But gents, go over. It's a interesting time. But gents. Oh, Cam, thank you so much for your time, mate. I know you're a busy man. You've got a young family that you've given us your time away from, which I truly appreciate that. And as I mentioned, gents, go check out Cam's work. He's doing incredible things that I believe, just tuning in, even if you're just listening to the podcast, I think it's going to help you improve your relationships, which once again will improve your overall quality of life. So thanks for your time, Cam.
Yeah, thanks, brother. I totally resonate with everything you've just shared as well. So I appreciate you platforming me like this, man. It's been a real honor.
It's great to have you back on, Matt, and I definitely look forward to having you on further, because there's still a few questions that the gents didn't get to ask. But as for those who did ask questions and they didn't get answered, head over and just get in contact with Cam yourself.
Yeah,
and for those tuning in for the first time, make sure you hit subscribe and all of that jazz, and share your favorite snippets from the episode. Thank you, guys. Mate, that was